the same way I did with Unit 1, I am going to go through every single problem in the Unit 2 study guide to help you prepare for your Unit 2 summative assessment. This study guide has 26 questions on it. Your Unit 2 summative has 25 questions. So there's one extra question on a topic that I think is very necessary for you to remember before going into that EOC. So number 1 says Courtney has $50 to spend at the county fair. She spends $10 on admission and $15 on snacks. The games at the fair cost $1.25 each. Write an inequality to represent how many games Courtney can play at the fair. Alright, so what we have to figure out is Courtney starts with $50. So we know that Courtney can spend less than or equal to $50. $50 has to be more than or equal to whatever Courtney can spend. We know that Courtney spends $10 on admission. She spent $15 on snacks. And then the games at the fair cost $1.25 each. Remember our words like each, every, and per represent a rate. We know that our rates come before our variable, so I'm going to call that 1.25x, with x representing the number of games she plays. So Courtney can spend less than $50. She already spent $10 on admission. She already spent $15 on snacks, so we have to figure out how many games she can play. I can simplify this by saying 50 is greater than or equal to 25 plus 1.25x. And this would be the inequality that would represent how many games Courtney would play at the fair. You could solve this inequality if they ended up asking you how many games Courtney played at the fair. Number 2 asks us to write a function to model or represent the data in the table. So it says x equals 4, 8, 12, and 16, y equals 2.5, 4.5, 6.5, and 8.5. The first thing I need to do is I need to look for two things. I need my slope and my y-intercept. Remember, your y-intercept is when x equals 0. So I need to look on this table to find out when x equals 0. And my slope is going to be my change in y divided by my change in x. So if I'm looking at this table, first looking for my y-intercept, I don't see x equals 0. It starts with 4. But I can see, if I go backwards, it's going down by 4. And if I go down by 4 one more time, I get 0. 4 minus 4 is 0. My y's are changing, minus 2. So if I go down 2 one more time, 2.5 minus 2 is 0.5. So my y-intercept is 0.5, because if I just follow the trends of this table, when x is 0, y is 0.5. Again, I did that by figuring out if it was increasing or decreasing every single time, and I knew I needed 4 minus 4 one more time to get to 0. And because I was decreasing by 2 every time, since I went one more time from this x, I'm going to go one more time from this y. 2.5 minus 2 gave me 0.5. Now I can figure out my slope by calculating my change in y divided by my change in x. My y's are changing at a rate of -2. My x's are changing at a rate of -4. -2 divided by -4 can be simplified to 1/2. So I'm going to write this as y equals 1/2 x plus 0.5. That would be my equation, because 0.5 is my y-intercept, my b. 1/2 was my slope, because I figured out how I was changing in the y direction, which was -2. How I was changing in the x direction, which was -4, which is simplified to 1/2. So y equals 1/2 x plus 0.5. Number 3 is very similar and asks us to write an equation to represent the graph. So I need two things. I need my slope And my y-intercept is where I cross the y-axis. I cross the y-axis at 5. So I could write this as 0, 5. My m is my slope, so my rise over run. I need to pick 2 points. And going from right to left. So I go down 2 to the right 1. So I go down 2, my rise is -2 to the right 1. I know this has to be a negative slope because I'm going downhill. So no matter what, my slope had to be negative, which is exactly what we got. So the equation for this would be y equals -2x plus 5. -2 over 1 is the same thing as -2. We said my y-intercept was 5, so y equals mx plus b. Y equals -2x plus 5. Number 4 asks us to find the domain and the range of this graph. So the domain is your x values, and your range is your y values. So hopefully by this time you have taken a look at packet 5, and in one of the videos it talks about domain and range. So to do the domain, I'm going to draw a line from each of my points to the x-axis. This point right here is already on the x-axis. I start with -4 and I go to +4. Then I have to determine if these are solid or open points. Since I have an open point at -4, I'm going to use a parenthesis. And since I have a closed point at +4, I'm going to use a bracket. Remember that open circles are parentheses, closed circles are brackets. For my range, it's going to be very similar, but now I'm going to draw lines to my y-axis to determine my range, or my possible y values. I start at 0, y equals 0 at this point, and I go up to 4. I have an open circle at 0, so I have a parenthesis. I have a closed circle at 4, so I have a bracket. My domain is -4 to 4. My range is 0 to 4. Number 5 asks us to determine which table is or are functions. So remember that functions, every input has only one output. So every x can only have one y. You can have multiple y's, but they have to have the same x. So one output, which is your y variable. So I have -10, 20, -5, 20, 0, 20, 5, 20. Since I don't have any repeating x's, I know this is a function. I'm going to circle it. Then I have -1, 0, 1, and 2. I have -3, -1, -1, -3. So for this one, I just turned my table sideways. -1 goes to -3, 0 goes to -1, 1 goes to -1, and 2 goes to -3. Even though both 0 and 1 go to -1, that's okay as long as each one of these is a different x. So you can have multiple inputs with the same output, but every output has to only have one input. So you can't put in 0 and get a -3 because 0 has to go to -1. This one here, we have -6, -4, -2, and another -4. So I'm going to leave that one off so I don't have any repeating. 2, 3, 4. -6 goes to 1. -4 goes to 2. -2 goes to 3. And -4 goes to 4 also. So because this -4 has two outputs, every time you input -4, you might get a 2 or a 4. That's not a function. So we said this was a function. That is not a function because one input has two different outputs. Number 6 says, for f of x equals 18 minus 1/2 x, find f of 2, and find x such that f of x equals 10. So this has two parts within one question. The first thing they want us to do is evaluate f at 2. And remember, this is just function notation. They replace the y with an f of x. Then they're saying find f at 2. So f at 2 replaces the x with a 2. So everywhere in my equation, I'm going to replace the x with a 2. F at 2 equals 18 minus 1/2 times 2, which is 1. So f at 2 equals 17. That was this first part. The second part says find x such that f of x equals 10. So I'm going to replace this f of x with 10. So I have 10 equals 18 minus 1/2 x. So I'm going to subtract 18 from both sides. I get negative 8 equals negative 1/2 x. Multiply both sides by 2. I get negative 16 equals negative 1x. Divide both sides by negative 1. That would mean that x has to equal 16. So when x equals 16 in my original function, it is going to be equal to 10. Let's circle that. Number 7 says you choose to rent jet skis for the day. The jet ski rental company charges a flat rate of $25 plus $8 for every hour of rental. There's my keyword every, my $8 every hour. I have one rate. So because I have one rate, I'm going to be using slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. My b is my constant, or my flat rate, which it says is $25. So it's going to be y equals $8 per hour plus 25. For this one, they want us to solve. I'm going to draw a line down my equal sign. First thing I need to check is if I can simplify anything on the left-hand side. I see I can distribute this 3. I get 3x minus 12 minus 4 equals 1. I can now combine like terms. I have a negative 12 and a negative 4. 3x minus 16 equals 1. If I add 16 to both sides, I get 3x equals 17. Divide by 3. I get x equals 17 over 3. This can be a fraction. Just because it's a fraction does not mean it's wrong. So x equals 17 over 3. Remember, our goal this year is to become more comfortable with fractions. So if you see fractions on your test, don't stress it out. Just answer the problem the same way you would. Alright, I will see you in the next video going over the next page.